So today's webinar is exploring these two activities, one called Broken Square around collaboration and one called Hollow Square around planning and delegation. So what we're going to cover today, so the first couple of things is that we're going to look at both activities independently. So what are they? How do they work? What kind of materials do they have? How would you expect them to progress and so on? Probably more importantly, what learning might you use them for? And we're going to explore that. I don't really have a sense yet, and we'll maybe ask that as we go through, how many people have actually used Broken Square or Hollow Square. So as I'm chatting in the introduction, maybe you want to send a message to everyone and just a simple yes if you've used either Broken Square or Hollow Square in the past, or no if you don't know either activity. And again, we'll have plenty of time for questions as we go through, but also some questions at the end. Now, it's really important that you get what you need. So if you have a question, comment, or query, please enter it in the chat box. If you are watching the recording on demand, then do please email sales@rsvpdesign.co.uk if you have any unanswered questions. Okay, so let's start with the background to Broken Square. So the main thing about the story of RSVP Design's version of Broken Square is that we didn't design it. So you can see here the design is originally credited to Alex Bavalas, an American psychologist. And our Broken Square activity was developed largely because my colleagues Jeff and Anne had come across versions of it, many years ago, recognized it as a really powerful tool. But as we couldn't find the various descriptions of it that were contained in a quality version with reusable materials and so on, we decided to create our own. So back in 2011, we decided to develop the activity into something that could be reused rather than a simple description and would fit with our design methodology of being relevant to specific learning outcomes, versatile in its application, simple to use and simple to facilitate, not necessarily simple for the users of it, and practical, so working with groups. Okay, and I can see from the chat there, if I just glance, there's quite a few people who are not familiar with either activity and some that are, so that's good, and we'll try to share that experience that people have when they know it. Okay, so relevance for RSVP design is a really important word. It's the first word in our design methodology, and for us it means choosing an activity that is directly relevant to the learning outcomes. So we believe that this activity, Broken Square, is around collaboration, but I think it's important maybe just to share and check with you guys who are listening to this just now if you have the same ideas. So let's imagine, and here's a question for you, I'd like you to pop an answer into the chat box and ideally just send it to all. So if a training request came in for you to improve collaboration skills, okay, so someone said, our team doesn't collaborate very well, I'm sure you've heard it before, but we have silos and we can't get people to cross them. What are the types of behaviours or skills you might want to seek to change, develop or improve in such a training programme? Another way of looking at it is if you were shadowing a group of people who collaborated really well, what would that look like? What types of things would you see? So I'll give you just a minute and I'll try and note down some of these as they come through. So you can see we've got some things about open communication or open and better communication. An interesting one, an awareness of interdependence. Okay. Taking others' perspectives. Okay, good. Okay, so we've got a few things to work at and we can come back and have a look at those, so that's useful. Here's one definition that I came across that I quite liked. So collaboration is when a group of people come together and contribute their expertise for the benefit of a shared objective, project or mission. And certainly this idea of working across silos, so it's a photographer working with a designer, technology department regularly convening with a marketing team to plug away at marketing goals. In other words, the process of group work. But what I liked about this code is it's a learned skill. It's something we could get better at. And certainly I agree with the last phrase here, how well you collaborate with others will greatly impact the outcome of any group project that you're working on. Okay, so we've got a few kind of definitions, we've got a few areas of where we might agree roughly what collaboration might look like. So let's move on to the activity itself then, broken squares, the materials and the setup. So the first thing is that if you get a version from us, you would receive 4 sets of 21 plastic pieces in 4 colours. Doesn't mean a lot at this point, but it will. A full facilitator guide, which is typical of any of our toolbox products. So you would get information on how to do any setup that's required, how to run the activity and what to expect, and then some suggestions and review and where you could take that learning. So in terms of setup, let's have a look. So the first thing is that Broken Squares works in groups of 4 people, and it really has to be 4 people. So we provide enough materials to do 4 groups. And if you imagine a group of 4, you've got 21 pieces. If you hand them out randomly, as you will, then people are going to have 4 or 5 pieces, okay? We also have a brief that you could just read aloud to that group if you've only got one group, or indeed a copy that they could read to themselves. So this is how a typical setup might look. So you can see here 4 people. They simply need to be seated around a table where they can have these plastic pieces in front of them and have the ability to kind of reach one another if they needed to pass pieces across the table. So that's the basic setup, relatively simple. And here's the briefing instructions. Okay, now hopefully you can read that on the screen, but I'll read them out just to kind of emphasize in case it's difficult to read. So the brief says you're working as a team of 4. So imagine you're in now a group of that 4, similar to the picture you've just seen. Each of you has been given 5 or 6 plastic pieces of a puzzle. When the facilitator tells you the exercise is started, you may begin working. And the objective of this exercise for the group of 4, so it's a team-based activity, not an individual one. You will be successful as a team when there is one perfect square, each of the same size, in front of each team member, and all of the puzzle pieces have been used. Okay, so that's the objective you're trying to achieve. There are some constraints, and it's important as a facilitator to try in this particular activity to make sure that people do follow these. So the first is you may only use the pieces that you've been given. No team member may speak or make hand gestures throughout the activity. So this is unusual, and it has to be done in complete silence. And again, it should become clear why that is later. You mustn't write or draw anything. And then importantly, team members may not ask for another person for a piece. They can't take a piece from another person, that the piece is in front of them, or signal in any other way that that person or another person is to give them a piece. So it's all about moving what you have to another person, and if you're offered a piece, you must accept it. Okay, you hand them over one at a time. Pieces have to be put into that person's hands, or at least placed on their pile in front of them, and not simply kind of dropped in the middle of the centre area. Time bound, we suggest 20 minutes would be sufficient to either complete the activity or indeed to get enough learning from it. Okay, so that's the brief. From that brief, if anyone has any questions or are not sure about anything, pop them into the chat and we can try and cover them as we go on. But hopefully that's relatively clear. So what I'd like to do is for you to now place yourself in this activity. One of the things I've found over the years is that the best way to consider whether an activity really fits with your needs is to have some experience of it as a participant before you consider it as a facilitator. So this is going to be a bit of a challenge to give you an experience of a physical activity over the camera and over the internet, but let's have a go. So imagine you're one of the players of a group of 4. You've been handed these 4 pieces. So you've got 2 orange squares, 2 orange triangles, and you've kind of, I guess, tried to assemble that into as close a square position as possible. And these are just flat, 2-dimensional, almost plastic pieces, so the same on both sides, coloured the same way. So you now look up from what you've got, and this is what you see the other 3 people in your group have. So you can see opposite you a kind of random collection of shapes that look like, you know, a few squares, triangles, but some other shapes. Someone on the right who appears at first glance to just have a number of triangles, and someone on the left who looks like they've built a square. Okay, so remember the rules: no talking, no taking something. You have to tell me what your next move would be. Okay, those are your pieces. That's what you can see in the table. So just pop in quickly whatever comes to mind. What would you do next if you had had this briefing and you've started the activity? So again, just pop in to all is probably useful, let everyone see. So anyone suggest what they would do next? Okay, you have the 4 pieces on the left. The other players have got what you can see. What do you do? Talking isn't an option, but you can type to me. Any suggestions? I'll give you a minute or so to think. Okay, so we've got some suggestions coming in. Okay, so people are looking at their shapes. Give the bottom right piece away. Okay, Candy, I would need to go to someone, but that's fine. Laura's suggesting she would give a triangle to the person on the right. Okay. Cheryl's now saying give 2 pieces. Okay, so it looks like she thinks 2 triangles would make that square, and that would give the person on the right. Okay, that's fine. So, okay, that's good. We've got a move, and that's generally exactly how the activity would start based on our experience. Okay. So imagine we've been playing this for a little while. Pieces have been exchanged. You've passed some pieces on. People have passed some pieces to you. Now, what would you do next? Okay, so this is what you now have. Okay, you now have 3 squares and 2 triangles, a lovely little neat square in front of you. Okay, you look up from yours and you see this is what other people have. I don't know what you see in this picture, but it looks to me like people are building all sorts of strange shapes. I'm not sure there's many squares. Looks like the person on the left could have a square close. So again, just like the last one, what would you do next? You have a full square. People have that in front of you. What do you do now? Again, I'll give you a minute or so to think about that. You've got a completed square. The other 3 have what you can see. What do you do? Okay, Cheryl's got a suggestion. She's going to give one of her small squares to the person on the left. Okay. Anyone else got any suggestions? What would they do? It's also advisable to do, not advisable, sorry. It's also possible to do nothing. Would anyone stay where they were and look to see what happened next? Okay, Kim's going to keep her square complete. So she's not going to pass any other parts off. Any more suggestions? Okay, so just while you're thinking about that, also, you know, what do you notice? What do you notice about the other shapes? Okay, did people really pay a lot of attention to what the other shapes were, or what do people think about what they already had? Okay, Mark Taylor is trying to cheat a C. Remind people using fingers pieces per person. No indications at all to anyone, Mark. If I was facilitating this, I would try to remind you of that. So anyone noticing anything about what's going on? If you compare it to the previous picture, one of the things that looks like that the previous person on the left had a complete square. They now don't have a complete square, but you do. Okay. So lots to think about. If you can imagine the frustration of working 20 minutes in silence on this, and for most people working in a very, very different way, which is not being able to complete your own task at all, having to rely on others to identify where you need help and doing it causes a lot of frustration. Okay, let's move on. So, like most activities, in fact, like every activity that you would get from RSVP Design, this does have a solution. This is how all of the various pieces go together. And And yeah, so Stuart has suggested at least one square may need to contain 8 to 10 pieces. That might be a possibility, but I don't think so, because the only way to get 4 squares that we've managed to come up with is this solution that you see in front of us. So what you had earlier in those pictures is 2 completed squares, but neither actually took you towards the solution. So in this activity, it's certainly about cooperation, because unless all 4 people can make a square, then no one succeeds. And in fact, in both cases, the players would have had to have broken up their finished square to be successful. And it's always interesting to see whether that had actually even been considered. So some of the typical behavioural responses we just considered there were, looking to try and help another person, which is great. Looking to break up a completed square, but also doing nothing and just settling with a completed square. So those who have used broken square before, what other kinds of behaviours might you see? So we just did a very kind of 5-minute guess at this, but those who have used it a few times, what else have you seen happen that we haven't talked about so far? What types of things have you seen? Again, just type into the chat. Disengagement, yep. Wanting to control, yeah, maybe that's what Mark was doing. You know, it's really difficult to want to control and ask for a piece rather than rely it. Cheryl, she hasn't used it, but yep, a lot of frustration, absolutely. And Michael is absolutely right. Most people who finish a square don't want to change it, and often don't change it. I've seen some really interesting body language that we kind of talked about. I've seen pieces fired across the table to another one. And it's really interesting to explore when you move to review what the people who received pieces felt like. When we explored that one, it certainly wasn't a cooperative type response that was expected or believed. I've also seen people give away every single piece they have. And again, their body language and the impression it left with the people who received it was more one of abdication. Rather than the words that were used as part of the review was, I was trying to help everyone by giving them lots of pieces. So this is an activity which not only looks at the process that people go through, but the types of feelings that are engendered when you try to work collaboratively, and they can be really quite strong. So one of the things I would then say is, you know, do the kind of themes that we've talked about of collaboration relate to the types of behaviours or skills you might want to see change, develop or improve? And in this case, I think there are. I mean, we've talked about quite an overlap between things like open and better communication. So when you put a restriction on communication like we do in this activity, not being able to speak, how do you get that open and better communication? So the review might take you down an area. So where in our organisational silos do we have the communication barriers that might be similar to that rule about not talking to each other? What do we do about it? How aware are we? Can we actually see over these silos to see what other people need if what our role is to try and give them what they need? So lots that we can, I think, relate to the theme of collaboration. But like any review, I think it's got to be based on what you hope to develop and choosing the activity for in the first place. So again, knowing the activity is really necessary, I think, before you pick it and before you move to looking at a review. But in our experience, certainly, the task always raises issues around a number of features. The first is this idea in collaboration to offer rather than waiting to be asked. So in this case, ideas, suggestions, resources, support. You might be doing all 4 of those when you pass a piece on, but how do you make it clear which it is? You need other communication channels to make that happen. Certainly the need to be proactive in generating possible solutions. If you sit back and do nothing, even when you've got a square in front of you, then you're unlikely to be able to complete it. And if this was a real activity, that might be something we could explore. Certainly this idea of allowing others to take responsibility and doing things on your behalf, that's really quite a challenge for many people. I think someone mentioned this idea of wanting to control, you know, asking for a piece rather than waiting for it to happen. And then again, it's really difficult to put effective problem-solving processes in place without good communication. I think that was the first thing that someone mentioned when they talked about collaboration, open and better communication. So you take that away, and in broken square, it becomes almost impossible. And then finally, if you've got collaboration, you've probably got a number of suggestions of how to achieve success. That can be really frustrating. And clearly, in this case, if the 4 people have probably got 4 different ideas of how this can be achieved, and without coming to a common way ahead, without being able to talk, it makes it really, really difficult to do so. Okay, so that's Hollow Square in terms of how it works. Maybe just go back full circle to our design methodology and thinking, well, how might I use this? Well, I think in terms of relevance, one way might be to think about it as, can we use this activity to bring this cooperative behaviour to light? So that might be, let's look at what happens with a real intact team. How cooperative are they? Do we see the attempts to kind of bridge this communication problem? Do we see cooperative body language? How does it actually work? Or indeed to allow them to practice it. In this case, we kind of force people into a behaviour that considers others first. But if that's a behaviour you want to develop in teams, then why not give them an activity where they can absolutely use that type of behaviour? The S in simple for us is simple to facilitate. So just as I did there, once you've counted the pieces and tipped them out, it really finished. You can provide an answer to show people that it can be done, but after that you're really just observing as you move towards a review through the activity phase. It does have some versatility, so I would suggest using observers if your numbers don't divide exactly by 4. So let's say you had 9 people or 10 people. What I would do is set up 2 groups of 4, have an observer in each. Halfway through the activity, swap the observer out with a player and give them an observation role. So doing it this way, you can virtually work with any number. In fact, I think you can work with any number from 4 till about 20. With 20, you would have 16 players and 4 observers, and I say you would just swap those out. And then the P for us are about practical, interesting in current times, but about getting groups of people together. There's no real theory in the activity, so I think you could apply it to any model of collaboration that you wanted, but we're just looking at fairly typical human behaviour. The P increasingly is portable for RSVP, and it's pretty portable too as that whole activity. Both activities actually fit inside the briefcase size bag that you can see in front of you. Okay, so that's Broken Square. I realise I'm kind of rattling pretty quickly through this. So any final questions on Broken Square before we move on? Again, just stick them into the chat if you have them. Okay, so I don't think we've got any. And again, if people, if they come to you, add them on as we go through, or indeed after the event, it's not a problem. Okay, so let's move on to Hollow Square. So, background to Hollow Square in some ways is very similar to Broken Square. We didn't design it. This activity came from an activity you can find, if you can get a hold of it, a very useful book called A Handbook of Structured Experiences for Human Relations Training. Pfeiffer and Jones, well known to many people in the development world. And again, we found that there weren't really a set of materials available. So around the same time, we decided, well, we could use very similar materials to make up this activity called Hollow Square. And again, check that it would fit with our methodology. So the relevance for Hollow Square is more in the area of management skills. So planning, team briefing, delegation, pretty useful, I think, for first level managers. And again, just to check in with you that we share the same understanding of these kinds of phrases, here's a couple of questions for you again. So if you were asked to improve the ability of first-line managers to delegate work to the team members they have, again, what are the types of behaviours or skills you might seek to change, develop and improve? Another way, if you weren't entirely sure, if you were able to shadow good managers and see what they do, what do the good managers do when they plan, brief and delegate well? So give me some suggestions here. So Candy's got the ability to set up accountability properly. Okay. Understanding the main aim. Okay. I like that one too. Give me a couple more. So what do you see good managers do when they plan, brief and delegate well? Not being too bossy. Okay, so something about how the delegation happens in terms of that communication. I think that's what's meant there. Clear and concise messages. Yep. SMART goals. Okay. Good coaching skills. Yeah. Okay, so a lot of these things I would concur with. They all seem pretty useful to me. Considering the individual's development, yep, that's interesting, Mark. So there's something there about the individuals, not just about the manager. Okay, I like those. Okay, here's something that I picked up as a definition. So this actually came, I think, from Investors and People, which is a kind of UK accreditation for people that manage their staff well. So they had 5 of the most important and effective line manager skills. I think delegation happened to be number 5, but they did say it's a critical line management tool. And here's some of the things they related towards delegation. So it's about getting work completed in timeframes that suit both employee and organisation. So there's something there about shared goals and accountabilities and resources that I like. Ensure that tasks get completed that are aligned with both those goals and empowering to the employee. So again, starting to consider the individual and empowering the employee as well as what's needed by the manager. Stretching their abilities while giving them the support they need to grow. So again, a lot of this delegation is thinking about the employees. And then finally, without the confidence and skills to delegate effectively, being an effective line manager is very difficult. Okay, so they're saying that these skills are really very, very important. So if they are very important, let's have a look at Hollow Square materials and see if we might use something like this to work with those skills in that area. And the materials for Hollow Square, as you can see in the picture bottom right there, are again some similar types of plastic shapes. In this case, there are 16. They're supplied separately, so you get 4 separate sets within the Learning Square package again here. This time it has laminated briefs and laminated assembly diagrams, so you would set up 4 groups of ideally 4 people, and again the full facilitator guide as mentioned before. So if you're running Hollow Square, the setup is relatively simple. You separate each of your groups of 4 into 2 sub-teams. And it's important that they're in different workspaces. It doesn't need to be 2 separate rooms, but at least in 2 separate areas of a room, maybe working on 2 different tables where they can't necessarily overhear each other or see each other's work. And again, this would work then with up to between 4 and 16 people, so up to 4 groups of 4 people with the resources. So one of the subgroups we call the planning team. This team has the brief and the assembly diagram. Okay, so that's your management team essentially. And then your operational team has the plastic pieces, and we just randomly tip them out in front of them. The picture you saw earlier was the completed diagram. So in this case, we literally just tip them out in front of them. We also tell them as a facilitator that they won't have any further information on what they have to do with these pieces, but the planning team does. Okay, and then move on and begin the activity essentially. So here is the brief. Again, just in case you can't read that, it might be a little bit small. The brief says, the task Hollow Square is a team communication and briefing task. It requires efficient use of planning time, attention to detail, and clear and concise transfer of instructions. So a lot of the things you just told me there were important in terms of good delegation. So the objectives for this sub-team is to plan and deliver a briefing to the operating team that will enable them to use the component pieces in their possession to assemble a hollow square that matches the one on your design diagram. And that's your design diagram there on the left. So if you imagine each black line is a delineation of each piece. So if you counted those up, I think there are 16 pieces and they have to go exactly like that to make that diagram. So again, some constraints. This briefing must only use words, either oral or written. So I would typically say to the planning team, you can either write this briefing down and hand it to the operations team, or you can go and read it out orally. But there's no opportunity to exchange diagrams, photographs, drawings, or any other pictorial representation of the hollow square. You must only use words. And you cannot show the diagram to the operating team at any point, essentially until the activity is over. So the planning team will not be allowed to any communication with the operating team during the assembly period. And during the assembly, you will only be allowed to observe as your instructions are carried out. So that means when you hand over this brief to the operations team, your job is finished. You have to sit silent and then watch to see if they can complete it. Okay. And at the end, as I say, you'll be able to and the design diagram to see if they've managed to build it correctly. Again, it's a time-limited exercise. Usually 20 minutes is plenty in order to be able to plan and do that brief, and then 10 minutes for the operating team to build it. So based on those instructions, would anyone have any questions about how the activity runs? No? Okay, so let's imagine then now you're part of this planning team. Okay, so unfortunately we only had 4 people, so we only had 3 people, so 2 of them are in the operations team and you're stuck there yourself in the planning team. So there's your brief as I described it. Here's your diagram. What would you do next? Okay, so start putting into the chat some suggestions about how you would begin this activity. Okay. One team has the pieces, you've got the brief as described. Okay, so someone's saying, make sure each shape has a unique name. Okay, that sounds good. So I'm just looking at this on the screen. I know you've lost half of the diagram, but I can probably see maybe 5 or 6 different shapes. Ones that I might recognize, like triangles and squares, ones that might be more difficult, parallelograms and maybe other geometric terms. Okay, good idea, Mark. David's saying triangles on the left. Okay, good. So again, just give me some ideas. Are you starting to write these down as a set of clear instructions? What's the process for this? Those that are starting to think, just again, give me some ideas about how you're thinking. Just type them in. Okay, so some people are saying work a way to describe it. So maybe going in a clockwise direction. Yep, that sounds like a good process. Stuart's got define and use a coordinate system. Great. Great. Write down on the paper and then hand it over. Okay, so we've got a few suggestions on how we're beginning to process, and I think people, by the sounds of it, are thinking of things like, as we mentioned earlier, that's important, be very specific, be very clear in those instructions to try and make sure that that message is passed across first. Okay, that's really useful. So now I'd like you to switch. So yeah, and we'll review these suggestions in a second. Yep, there's another one just come in as well. Break up the overall shape into smaller components. So we've got a number of suggestions around the process of writing those instructions, okay? But let me ask you now to switch. So if you're now part of the operational team, okay? That's the pieces you've got in front of you. I've told you that the planning team has some more information, but let's assume that the discussion that we just had goes on for sort of 15, 20 minutes as Mark and Laura and Stuart and Kim and everyone else are writing down these instructions. Tell me what you think you would be feeling like during that 20 minutes. Give me some ideas. Confused, lost, frustrated? Absolutely. Yeah. Apprehensive? Anticipating, being cross, yeah, increasingly disengaged, absolutely, yeah. All of the things that we said were really useful not to do if you're going to be good at delegating, okay? All of the things that we talked about making your people feel engaged, empowered, not isolated, David, all of those things, absolutely. But task process being what task process is, it kind of very rarely happens. So what are the typical responses? Okay, so we've looked at the typical responses that we've just said from the planning team, and I know these are off the top of your head, but they are very common, and those of you who have used this exercise before may want to concur. Stuart's saying, absolutely, in the workplace we'd be busy on another project. Yeah, I'm going to come to that in a second. So we've considered them from the planning team, but it didn't sound like, and I know I didn't really give you an opportunity, but the planning team didn't really consider how they might engage with the operational team. And usually what happens is people say to me at the end of the activity, well, you said we couldn't show them the diagram. You said we couldn't talk to them. We couldn't show pictures, and you said we couldn't talk during the operational phase. Absolutely, but we didn't say you couldn't talk during that 20-minute phase. There was nothing to stop a member of the planning team wandering into the operational team to say, just to let you know, here's what's going on. We have to create a diagram. We won't be able to let you see it, but you've got to put the parts together. You know, actually get them engaged in the task that's about to happen, but it very rarely happens. Okay, and the typical behavioural responses that we might need to see that demonstrate good planning, team briefing and delegation skills, most of them about keeping the people that we're trying to delegate to involved and motivated and empowered, tend to get missed out in this activity. And it also tends to be what happens in the workplace. I ran this recently, and I asked the planning team what happened, how did they feel during that 20 minutes when no one talked to them and no one told them what they were to use these pieces for. And they said, oh, we were quite happy. I said, well, why was that? They said, well, we started talking about football and other things. So already moved away from the project, not interested, as Stuart said, they might be busy on another project, but they're certainly not engaged. And if you need to keep them engaged, then you've certainly lost them if you leave them alone for that amount of time. So hopefully you would agree that a review of performance and activity, if it goes just the way we described, would demonstrate some of the important factors that might be missing or might not have been demonstrated in the ability to effectively delegate work. So they might have come up with some instructions, but it would be very rare in this case if they'd actually managed to complete the task or certainly complete it satisfactorily. So those are the very common features in the way Hollow Square tends to work. So again, from a review point of view, if you've run the activity and it is fairly predictable, it would tend to move in that way. Here's typically what goes on. It is an activity that explores issues of trust. I mean, trust wasn't mentioned yet, but trust is a very important part in line managers being able to delegate effectively. And with people not telling what's going on, then trust can be kind of eroded really, really quickly. Effective communication, yes, we put constraints on it, but again, in a review, it might be useful to say, well, do we just assume that there's constraints or do we involve people? In terms of learners, I think it does help them to understand the importance of involving operational staff. So we all said at the beginning there, we knew we had to do it, but when it came down to it, it wasn't people's first. When I asked you what you do next, the first thing wasn't, let's go and involve the operational staff. Okay, it was more about planning what needed to be done. Yes, this impact of lack of communication and trust between groups, I think that's very easy to review and asking people how they felt over that 20-minute period. And yes, it's about, I think, you could put people into this situation to allow them to practice and learn the key skills of team briefing. And then finally, this idea about clear, concise and unambiguous language. So even where there is some discussion, when I have seen it done, it's actually really quite difficult to get that transfer of what is a complex and ambiguous pattern to give to someone just in written language. So it's really quite difficult to write that clear and concisely and unambiguously to be able to let the planning group to prepare it. And then finally, again, this most appropriate methods. Obviously, there are some rules which make it more difficult, but what would be the appropriate method if you then move the review into the real workplace? You know, verbal, written, you know, chances to do it collaboratively. What is the most appropriate method? And let's find it. So a couple of suggestions on linking this to our methodology. One, yes, you might want to perhaps look at people who've been through their first management development theory, you know, who give us the same kind of answers to the questions I pose, but then put them into an activity and say, can you actually put this into practice and really deepen the learning, or indeed provide them an opportunity. So we've been doing this for years. Let's just have a go and see if we're still useful at putting these skills into practice. Again, simple to facilitate, much as I did here. You drop the pieces with the people and then watch. I would suggest not to be tempted to lead people in this, because you will get typically the planners and the operational people asking for suggestions. I would absolutely stay at the side and just observe, because people should have the knowledge and the skills to be able to do this. You may want to step in and coach them if it's a development opportunity, but that's quite a different thing. The other thing I was thinking about, and it's particularly relevant today, we're all going to have to brief and instruct someone that's remote from us. If not today, then certainly within the next few weeks. So if we all did this within our intact teams, what could we learn from such an activity? And then finally, it is a practical thing. It's a good opportunity to check if you can put theory into practice, as we discussed, and again, comes in that same bag, so pretty portable. Okay, I'm kind of looking at my watch. I'm coming to 2:45. I've covered both activities, I think, but I would like to offer the opportunity if anyone's got some specific questions over the next 2 or 3 minutes before we close up. So any questions, just put them into chat. If you have heard enough from me and need to move on to something else, thank you very much for attending. We do have options both on our UK and international website. So if you go to rsvpdesign.co.uk, you would find Learning Squared. If you go to the .com, that website is purely for US customers. So you would find Learning Squared on that. Okay. So a question from Candy is, do they come a pair in one purchase? Yes, absolutely. Learning Squared, as you can see in that picture, that's a picture of the materials for both Broken Square and Hollow Square. So you get enough materials to run both activities, even together, for 16 people. Any final questions? Yeah, Stuart's saying, I think useful to hold on if people have this. Does anyone have any responses from clients, such as it's not representative of real life? I'll allow others to comment on that, but for my situation, absolutely not. If you're using it to kind of sensitize people to say, well, and you ask them, is that how management briefing is done in this organisation? If it's done poorly, then the answer is usually yes. If they don't collaborate and you say, well, is this the way that people tend not to collaborate and the reason we have silos in this organisation, they say yes. So I haven't found it a problem to make those connections with real life. Do the operational teams ever feel that the facilitator has just wasted their time in the Hollow Square? I wouldn't say so. I think they get frustrated, but the frustration tends not to be with the facilitator. It tends to be either the operational team to the planning team or the planning team to the operational team, because really that time that's been wasted was theirs. They both had the same amount of 20 minutes to complete it. So I haven't found that, Mark. No. Very rarely does a facilitator get blamed. Okay, I'm now at 2:45, so I'm going to close off today. Thank you very much for attending. Okay, I hope you have a great day, great weekend. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.